as we proceed, every time I talk about Advent, all I want to do is say Happy New Year. And yeah, it's a very strange Happy New Year. But that is what it is. Between the rush to Christmas, the holiday parties, the extra baking and cooking that we do in the month of December, sometimes it can be so difficult as individuals and then as leaders of congregations to help us live into the fact that this is the beginning of our new year in the Christian calendar, or in the Christian liturgical calendar. And honestly, I think that is because it's so hard to start something with waiting, right? And that is what the season of Advent is. It's a season of waiting and longing. And that's how we begin our rhythm in the Christian year every year. But every year, as we are invited to begin again, not with the arrival of Christ, but with waiting and watching for our salvation to come, the season of Advent can also bring our mental wellness into sharp focus. The goal of the sermon guide, Journey Toward Mental Wellness, is to use scripture, theology, and public health to help congregations connect their faith to their individual and communal journeys toward mental wellness. Now, our society often approaches mental health as something that doesn't need much attention unless we are in an emotional crisis or we have a diagnosed mental illness. Yet, like our physical health, our mental health and wellness needs tending whether we are in crisis or in a season of relative peace, or honestly, somewhere in between. In this sermon guide, we invite congregants to cultivate 3 essential skills for nurturing our individual and communal wellness: naming emotions, non-judgmental and compassionate listening, and active hope. While we recommend using this sermon guide as an Advent series, we also include alternate liturgical and homiletical options should you wish to use it outside of the Advent season. Part of the reason we did this, honestly, is that Advent can also come with so many traditions that we did not want the focus on Advent to keep congregations from having access to and the opportunity to experience this sermon guide. The sermon series is 3 weeks long to allow for flexibility to incorporate a Christmas cantata or special music Sunday during Advent, if that is your church's tradition. The guide also includes a liturgy for a service of the longest night, which is often held on or around the winter solstice on December 21st. The longest night service creates space for participants to name, accept, and bless their grief and struggles as we move toward Christmas and the new year. I want you to think of this service as a chance to exercise the skills discussed in the 3 weeks of the sermon guide in the context of corporate worship. And while congregations are encouraged to use the longest night service on a weekday close to or on the winter solstice, you can also use it as the final week of Advent if your church doesn't typically do a special music service during Advent. The scriptures used in this guide are drawn from Advent readings found in years A, B, and C of the Revised Common Lectionary. And in addition to cultivating skills for mental wellness and becoming aware of ways we can pay attention to and support our own mental wellness and that of our neighbors, a theme that runs through each of these scriptures and sermons is exile, reflecting on the oppression and brokenheartedness of exile, as well as the hope, realized or not, of the restoration of Israel out of exile. The theme of exile offers a grounding point for theological reflection throughout the sermon guide. By naming the conditions of the Israelites' exile, the preacher can help the congregation recognize how we or our neighbors experience similar hardships today. By recognizing recognizing the struggles that contribute to mental health challenges, the church is then invited to imagine ways to participate in bringing about restoration and flourishing that nurtures mental wellness for ourselves and our communities. Notably, this sermon guide does not equate mental wellness with the removal of mental illness. I'm going to say that one more time. The sermon guide does not equate mental wellness with the removal of mental illness, nor does it assume that mental health challenges require a diagnosis in order to have a significant impact on the lives of individuals and their families. Rather, the sermon guide presents mental wellness as a health goal and possibility for all people, while also recognizing that the hardships that impact our mental health are not always in our control. Thus, the guide approaches the journey toward mental wellness as a communal effort. While the community can contribute to the hardships that cause mental health challenges for others, the community can also come together to nurture and cultivate the possibility of mental wellness for each other. Thus, you will find a mix of individual and communal suggestions in the call to action bulletin inserts that help congregants practice these new skills in relation to God, to themselves, and to one another. So with that overview of an introduction of a journey toward mental wellness, I now want to welcome Dan Lord, who is going to offer us some highlights that he found in the sermon guide. And Dan, first I just want to invite you to introduce yourselves to us before you jump in.
Good. Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you for this very good work. I'll say more about some of those details, but first, I just want to say, I'm so glad to see you all, welcome you all, and especially since I've served on the Health Fund Board of Directors now for about a decade. A special welcome to our Healthy Congregations pastors and those of you who have served Healthy Congregation churches. For your interest and hopefully your gain from the mission and concerns of the Health Fund as well. Let's see, I'm going to make one change here in my screen. I don't have anything, there we go, to share by way of slides or anything. But I do want to say that I appreciated Lisa's organization of this around the liturgical year, because the rhythms of liturgical year actually are born out of rhythms of human experience. And so that's part of why Advent is such a very powerful time for us to be together. And the focus of the journey toward mental wellness, you know, like she states, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And the journey, of course, is crucial. Maybe today, as hard to say more than ever, but it's particularly pointed today with the amount of stress that's on our societies. And I'm sure you experience it as I do, you know, in my local church life as well. By background, I did my seminary work at St. Paul's School of Theology, and first was a member of the former Kansas East Conference many years ago. After about a decade in parish work, I went to Boston and did a PhD in pastoral psychology and counseling at Boston University. And then eventually I moved into extension ministry in mental health, first at Prairie View here in the Newton, Wichita area. And then eventually I joined the faculty at Friends University, where I taught, directed and taught and trained therapists in the accredited graduate degree in marriage and family therapy. And now I've retired from both of those settings, although my 6-year-old granddaughter reminds me daily that I'm a failure at retirement, and really, you know, encourages me to free more time for play. Now, I also want to say a comment here about the organization that Lisa's done. You know, there's sermon guides, but really sermons are carried in the container of liturgy. And so you'll find in the guides really very helpful ritual. that really helps to provide a ground level experience here for the content, you might say, which is a part of what we all do, in terms of the relying on the ritual of the service to help us bring the content of Scripture and of the message and its application today. But where I really want to begin is where Lisa begins in her sermon guide. And right underneath that initial introduction, I just wanted to add a little bit to say, not only is mental wellness very important now in our population, it's important to you and to us as clergy, because clergy are some of the very front line, very front room people who experience the immediate impact of health status and issues around the country, especially related to our outlook, you might say. And so when it comes to discouragement or a sense of darkness or a longing for hope, we don't have to wait to be called. It's often we're invited to be there. And that has an impact on you. So I want to begin with an exercise, or actually first three lines under her statement, how to use this sermon guide and toolkit. And I want us to do it together very quickly, because here's the way it goes. Here's the line in this in her guide. Welcome. And of course, if you were in my classroom, or my Sunday school class I've taught for 34 years, you would respond to me, welcome back, but welcome. Now, please take a deep and beautiful breath. Inhale, take it in, and let it out fully and enjoy it as you release it. Now do that again, and as you do that, hear this word again, welcome. Now, what she doesn't say is that 20 seconds of intentionally changing your body's experience of breathing begins to change everything else in your body's chemistry and makeup, and even within your mental processes. 20 seconds begin that. So you can imagine why the information, the practice she brings, especially in this sermon series, if it occurs 3 weeks, what happens is what she states here after she introduces the three skills, it'll take root in your congregants' lives. And I would hope to encourage you to take root in your own. Actually, a word about these, I would encourage you to approach these toolkits, first of all, not as just oh my gosh, I gotta prepare, I gotta choose, but I gotta pick, and what am I gonna do? Not in your work mode, but approach it in your devotion mode. If you don't use these toolkits for preaching and with your congregation, I encourage you to consider using them for you and for your own devotional time. They've had that effect on me, and I'm confident they will have that effect on you. As she mentioned, there are three skills that this sermon series focuses on, one a week. And the first one is the naming of emotions. And of course, there's very useful information and research around how much this helps to move something from a generalized and diffuse anxiety into a more specific and manageable and something you can respond to. Naming emotion. It's also grounded in our tradition of lament. And she borrows from the Psalms. Each of the scriptures for this series is a psalm, and of course you can add gospel readings to it as you might wish. But we have such a rich tradition of naming our difficulty, our struggle, our longing, and sometimes with great passion and energy at that. But naming emotions is the first skill. And the second one also is deeply grounded in our faith and liturgical traditions. And that is the listening, the art of listening, being still enough to listen for another, but listening with non-judgmental and compassionate listening. Now, in theology, we name that loving grace. We would listen with grace to another. And it's so important today because so much of our interaction is not based on listening, it's based on rebuttal. It's based on fixing. It's on telling somebody instead of receiving what they are telling or sharing with us. The hardest part, I think, of living with a congregation is how often you would be hearing something told to you and how much it might touch something deep in you that you'd want to address, or how much you would want to you'd see an opportunity to help them by if they would just do this kind of thing. I mean, I wanted to start my little time here by saying, be sure you wiggle your bottom a little bit, because I got to shift to my share. But if you don't do that, then your own thought processes will start to wither away here. But so this whole notion then of how we respond to somebody when they share, just by this non-judgmental and compassionate listening. And then the third focus is the one of inviting, engaging people in active hope. Now, hope is actually one of those mental health skills that can have the most impact over time, not if it crowds out lament or naming difficulty, but rather than when it accompanies. So when you name what is difficulty, when you also let that naming give birth to what hope would look like. And isn't this a part of what scriptural lessons throughout the church year bring us, help us to name hope of what it will look like when the tears are dry, when laughter and dancing returns. So these are really three very, very essential skills. She has sermon or bulletin inserts for each of them. And these again are ways to move from what is done in the church service over to what happens in their own life so that it'll take root. Well, guys, there's just so much to share. I recommend you use her resource as a whole, because again, it will organize the entire liturgy, but you can use parts of it. If you use this one in ordinary time, I encourage you to reference Advent, because it's just such a common time and rhythm in our lives as Christians, that just to say, this is what we do in Advent. We're sharing it today because the feeling of hardship and the longing for hope isn't restricted to just beginning. It's in the ebb and flow of all of life. And I would encourage you to watch for connecting points, as she highlights too, with the events in your local church. All of these issues are so much more than national issues or social issues. They always have an expression in the personal lives, yours as well as your congregant with them. I guess one last thing, I began with that little exercise. Wherever she offers you exercises like this, I'd encourage you to do them multiple times. Live with them, get comfortable with them yourself. So when you stand in front of your congregation during worship, this is something that you will authentically be able to say, to lead an experience where they see you as well as hear your directions and guidance. It will enhance their experience of what this lesson is about. So let me stop here at that point of time. Although I'd like another 30 minutes if you have any extra of it.
Dan, thank you so much for those wonderful highlights and really helping contextualize how this could work in local communities, and also, we hope, benefit you as pastors in your own journeys and in your own vocation. We have about 2 minutes for some questions. So this is where we can use the reaction buttons. If you have a question to ask, if you will hit a reaction button of any kind, I will call on you, and you can unmute and ask your question for the benefit of the group. If I don't pronounce your name correctly, please feel free to correct me on that. So do we have any questions about the Journey Toward Mental Wellness Guide? Okay. If you have any questions that kind of pop up for you, again, write them down, and we will be happy to address those throughout the day. Now we are going to turn to our free writing practice. And for this, we are going to encourage you to get a pen and paper or get a Word document up on your computer. And here's how this practice goes. I will tell you again, as someone who recently defended her dissertation and finished writing her dissertation, I've spent a lot of time thinking about and experimenting with what it means to like build skills as a writer. And you, as people who have to write a sermon every week, you are writers. Whether you feel like it or not, you are a writer. And so I want to share with you, maybe in these practices, a skill that has been useful to me whenever I am starting a thing and trying to figure out what is most important, that I want to make sure I get out. So we're going to take 10 minutes and have everyone on mute for that. And I want you to do this practice where you take pen in hand or put your fingers on the keyboard, and for 10 minutes, you do not pick them up. The pen stays on the paper, the fingers stay on the keyboard, and I want you to think of it like sticky glue, and you have to keep moving. So you're either keeping your pen moving the whole time, or you're keeping your finger tapping a key while you get your thoughts out. You would be amazed at how many notes pages I have that just have a ton of J's across them until I found my words again. And that is the goal of this, is to just free write, keeping the motion going for 10 minutes. And I want you to focus on this question. What have I heard today that is important for my congregation to hear? I'm going to say that one more time. What is important about let me rephrase it. What have I heard today that is important for my congregation to hear?